you have paper and pen?
Oh, I'm deaf too.
Oh, are all the workers here deaf as well?
Yes, the entire staff is deaf.
Oh, okay. I'd like a Wii Royale.
Sure.
I'm just curious, who's your role model?
My role model is a woman named Claudia Gordon. She's a deaf lawyer and she works for the White House.
My role models are my grandmother and my mother. When I was growing up, they taught me how to make food from scratch. I always wanted to be a chef one day.
The people who I look up to are my parents. They've worked incredibly hard to survive, and I admire them for that.
My entire family's deaf. My father was a photographer who took pictures based on what people wanted, whether they were mountains, or trees, or buildings. I was impressed with how my father, as a deaf man, managed to communicate with his hearing clients.
I admired and respected one of my teachers who taught printmaking from 30 years ago at my old school in California.
She's accomplished so many extraordinary things.
That's really cool.
As you can see, role models are imperative for everyone, regardless of their hearing status. We want to understand how role models may be beneficial for deaf people in particular. We're using a theoretical framework called social capital in order to understand the importance of role models in deaf people's lives. Social capital describes how connections and networks between people provide access to information. For example, if a person is looking for a job, being introduced to the right people and making connections can result in successfully obtaining employment. This is an example of social capital in action. How we did the study. We set up 5 questions. Why are role models important? What do they do? Where does role modeling happen? When do we need them? And how do they support deaf and hard of hearing individuals specifically? We did a research synthesis, which means that we gathered relevant articles to our topic, in this case, role models. We did a search for articles that used the key term role models, but of course not articles used that keyword specifically, instead mentioning mentors, leaders, or guides. After collecting all of the relevant articles, we summarized key findings and looked for common themes to synthesize relevant information. We found a total of 18 articles. What did we find?
Why are role models important?
95% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. That child could possibly be the first deaf person they have ever met. That means that those parents may have limited perspective of what their deaf child can accomplish. Deaf youth do not have the opportunity to interact with peers. They are often lonely and isolated. Role models who are deaf can provide support from a place of shared understanding.
What do role models do?
Role models contribute to multiple aspects of life. We found 5 broad categories. First, parent attitudes. Parents often focus on what their child can't do. However, meeting successful deaf adults can help parents focus on what their child can do. Language development. Research indicates that if families and their deaf children work with a deaf mentor, the child demonstrates improvement in ASL as well as in English. Identity development is the important process of understanding our roots and our cultural practices. Psychosocial development, which refers to the overall feelings about self, such as self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, improved peer relationships, and resilience. Navigational capital recognizes that as youth navigate a variety of settings, such as workplace or schools, they may face obstacles. This is when deaf role models can provide support, empathy, and provide strategies on how to cope and navigate.
Where does role modeling usually happen?
Role modeling can happen anywhere. Role modeling can take place in workplaces or schools, but many studies explain that role modeling often happens in residential schools, where staff and teachers are also deaf and share the same identity.
When do we need role models?
Role models are needed from birth to career, early in life to support language development and strengthen family interactions. In middle school, they provide support through a period of identity exploration. When individuals enter college, they must learn to navigate the landscape of accommodations and related services. Role models can provide support in many aspects of life.
How exactly do role models support deaf and hard of hearing people?
We found 2 ways they can support deaf individuals. First is effective communication, which is warm, engaging, and full comprehension occurs. The second area is high expectations. In a previous video, we shared findings about the significant impact of parent expectation. Does this mean we should spoon-feed deaf youth? Absolutely not. We should expect them to act autonomously and do whatever they set their mind to. Takeaway message. Deaf role models are clearly important and meet multiple needs. They can also provide a strengths-based perspective based on deaf gain as opposed to a deficit perspective. However, there are areas of concern. There are not enough deaf role models available. Most professionals who work with deaf youth are hearing white women. Deaf role models are important, yes, but there are very few deaf role models who are diverse. Identification solely as a deaf person may not be enough. Research has found that if deaf students work with professionals with whom they share identities, their academic performance is improved. Deaf students say that there are not enough diverse role models. So there's something for us to keep in mind as we move forward. We must make sure that deaf youth can access role models who are deaf and diverse.